the importance of being ignorant. As many of you, perhaps most of you will know, at Brief, we have been delivering training courses on the solution-focused approach for many, 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 many years. And sometimes people email us before a course and say something on the lines of, I haven't done any training in therapy or psychotherapy or counseling or coaching before. Would this course be appropriate for me? And of course, sometimes people email us and, as it were, say the opposite. I am trained in psychotherapy and counseling. I have done this course and this training and that training. Would it be okay if I started at your level 2 or level 3 or level 4, or perhaps could I come straight on to the advanced course? And as it happens, my response, I always try to be nice and polite and helpful, but my response to those queries says something about solution focus. Because when people say, I've had no training before, can I do the course? As I'm responding, I'm secretly sitting there feeling envious. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, you don't realize how much easier it is going to be to learn solution focus if you know nothing about any other model, any other approach. And for the people who say they have done lots and lots and lots and lots of training, could I miss level 1 or level 2? I tend to say, well, do you know, actually, the more training you've done, the harder it is to learn solution focus. You're definitely going to have to do level 1 because you're going to have to, if you like, forget so much or unlearn so much. It's going to be so much harder if you've had lots and lots and lots of training. So actually, there is something quite challenging about developing the requisite ignorance to be able to practice as a solution-focused worker. Now, when we're talking about being ignorant, what is it that we're, and I would use the word choosing to be ignorant about? And the first thing we're choosing to be ignorant about is choosing to have absolutely no view on what people should want from the therapeutic process. So we have no view on what is bringing people. We choose to have no view on what is bringing people. We choose to have no view on what their, as it were, problem might be. Because as soon as we start having views on these things, we start having ideas about what people should be doing in order to resolve these issues. And then we start trying to get people, however nicely and however subtly and however politely, but we start trying to get people to do things. And in solution focus, at no point are we ever trying to get people to do specific things in their lives. So we choose to be ignorant about what brings people to us, and we choose to be ignorant about what the problem may or may not be in the person's life. Now, in addition to that, we choose to be ignorant about how the person who's come to us, how their life is going to be transformed once what they want from us, their best hopes, are all happening. Because, of course, if you have no view on what brought people, if you choose to have no view on what the problem is, then what we have to do is to ask, we have to inquire. So what are your best hopes from our talking together? How will you know that this has been useful. And once people have described their best hopes, we've then got a focus, we've then got a direction, and we can invite people to describe how their life will be transformed by the presence of their best hopes. So choosing to have no view on how people's lives will be transformed by the presence of the best hopes means that we can center the person who comes. We can support and facilitate them in describing the life that they want. So here is another way that our ignorance is useful, because through our ignorance, we can center the people we work with. Now, in addition to that, we have no strategies. We have no solutions, even though this approach that we use is called solution-focused brief therapy. As it happens, we choose to have no solutions. We choose to have no strategies. We choose to be ignorant about what people could or should do in order to resolve their issues, in order to build the futures that they want. The more that we adopt a position, a stance of ignorance, the more that we are obliged to ask people questions that will lead to people defining their own best ways towards the futures that they want. And of course, when people move forward in their own best way, those ways are more likely to be fitting with them at every level of identity. And indeed, when people develop preferred futures, their lives as transformed by the presence of their best hopes, preferred futures, in a way that fits them, then change appears to be more sustainable. So here's a third way in which ignorance is not just useful, but in solution focus, vital. And of course, we choose to have no view on what people should do after sessions. We leave it open to people discovering their own best ways towards the lives that they want. And so we are curious, or we invite people themselves to be curious about what they find themselves doing between sessions that is useful to them, rather than predefining what people should do, what you ought to do. We merely invite people, in my case, rather indirectly, to focus on what they find themselves doing, what they find themselves doing that's useful, and what they find themselves doing that inevitably fits the life that they want. And so I say to people at the end of a session, look, it's not my job to boss you about, but let me just give you a little word of warning, all right? Now that you've decided you want to come back, assuming they have, of course, now that you've decided that you want to come back, the very first question I'm going to ask you when you come back next time is, what's been better? So if you start watching out for it now, it'll make your next session easier for you. But it's up to you what you do. And so I finish a session ignorant in relation to the specifics of what people should do. The more that we predefine what people should do between sessions, the greater the risk that the client will fail, that people will fail. Whereas when we leave it very, very open, allowing people to discover their own best ways of moving forward, there is a massive likelihood that people will come back describing better, even if the better that they describe are tiny elements of better. So ignorance in relation to what brings people, ignorance in relation to the life that people should have or could have, ignorance in relation to people's strategies and solutions, and ignorance in terms of what people should be doing between sessions. And what does ignorance give us? Where does it lead us? What is the upside of ignorance? The upside of ignorance is the centering of the person we're working with, centering them in the conversation, what they want, how they'll know that their life has been transformed, their best ways of moving forward, what they decide to do between sessions. So ignorance really is important. Now, as it happens, we choose to be ignorant about a whole pile of other things. We choose to be ignorant about who should come to sessions. When people ask us who should come, we say, anyone you would like to have in the session, you decide. We're ignorant about how often people should come to see us. At the end of each session, we ask people, would it be useful? Would you like to make another time? Do you think that could be useful? Or do you think, you're 1 or 2 or 3, however many sessions they've had, that'll be enough? Or would you like to go away and have a think about it and let us know? So we have no view on whether people should or shouldn't come back to see us. So who comes? Should they come back? And if they do decide to come back, when should they decide to come back? When do you think that it might be useful to come back for your next session? So the more that we develop ignorance, the more we center people's own preferences. Now, of course, 2 things. When I talk about the importance of ignorance, I'm using the word ignorance in its original form, merely not knowing. Ignorance these days has rather been transformed, the meaning of it. And it sort of these days means not knowing how to behave, impoliteness, rudeness. And I don't mean it in that sense at all. I think solution-focused practitioners are incredibly polite and kind and respectful. All right. So important to remember that. Ignorance originally just meant to not know. And of course, when I use the phrase not knowing, it's important to acknowledge the work of Anderson and Gulishian at the Galveston Institute in the United States. They were the first people, I think, who wrote about not knowing. So just a little reference, a little remembering of them. And look, some of you may not know this, but when Oscar Wilde wrote The Importance of Being Earnest, he was first put on in 1895, there was a little subtitle. I didn't know this until actually this week. So the subtitle was A Trivial Comedy for Serious People. Now, I'm sure all of you are serious people. How trivial you might find this presentation is, of course, also for you to decide. I couldn't possibly know that either.